But I want to pivot away from the draft for a minute and kind of just get your thoughts on the overarching picture that is the Blue Jays. What are your thoughts so far on this season and how things went? And what do you think they're going to do next? Like, we all sort of know they're going to do the retool, but do you believe that they should kind of continue leaning into it for 2025? Or do you think this is a team that's in a spot for a teardown now?
I have an ever growingly strong opinion on, like, each day I'm getting more convicted about just wanting the Blue Jays to tear it down, for a few reasons. At the same time, my own desires for this do not weigh what the team has to weigh, like revenue and things like that. But ultimately, I believe multiple things can be true. I believe the Jays absolutely can be a wild card contender next year by keeping their non-free agent players, doing some moves in the offseason, and being competitive. That's just the nature of a playoff system that has 6 playoff teams. At the same time, I do not think the Jays are going to be positioned to be an especially great team next year. And I don't think they're willing to spend or take the risk of spending long-term money on big contracts. I don't necessarily think they have present year budget to do that. But I also don't think that, given that we might be staring down a cliff in a year or two, I don't think they want to be saddled with big contracts, basically, that only give them potential payoff in year one. So to me, I'm like, okay, well, if this is all built around a 2025 run, I just don't like the core of the team enough to make that run. The massive regression of the bullpen this year and the lack of, looming options in the bullpen, and the fact you have to spend on that in the offseason, means that, like, you can only spend so much money. And also, the Blue Jays 2 years ago were an attractive free agent destination because they were a team on the come up and they looked like they had a sustainable history. Now you're not going to win tiebreakers with other teams in free agency because a player who wants a 3-4 year deal is going to look at Toronto and be like, am I a trade candidate after year one? Like, am I going to have stability for my family? All that stuff. So I think the Blue Jays should be trying to make their 2026 and 2027 roster as good as possible. I think all eyes should be focused on that right now. And to me, that means, entertaining a Vlad trade, entertaining a Bo trade, which is unfortunate because his value is low. So maybe you hold on to him, hope that he finishes strong, and then trade him in the offseason. But basically, I think this deadline, this winter, and next deadline should all be used as opportunities to pull the trigger on trades when you think at that present time it's the best offer you're going to get for that particular player. I've conjured up some Vlad hypotheticals that I feel passionate about.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about who we're getting, who the Jays would be getting in return, but the Mariners desperately need offense. The Mariners owners are woefully cheap, and Vlad has a year and a half of control. They need a first baseman. To me, I think you take advantage of the fact that Rogers, has money. I think you take a bad contract back from Seattle and relieve them of the burden of Mitch Garver next year, or especially Mitch Haniger. Mitch Haniger makes like 17.5 next year, and he's basically unplayable at this point. So what the Jays should be doing is saying, hey, give us a great trade return. We will send you Vlad, who's going to make a lot of money next year. The Mariners might be hesitant to take on a contract like that unless they're getting relief elsewhere. So if the Jays go and take Haniger's 17.5 next year, and then the Mariners only have to pay Vlad next year a net difference of like 10 million, that's a big win for them. The Mariners also have a loaded farm system with bats. I love trading for bats. I want to trade for bats. I think there's a real opportunity there. That being said, Vlad is a first baseman who goes through prolonged power slumps. He doesn't provide too much value defensively. He's an okay first baseman. I think it's really hard to grade with your eyes the quality of a first baseman, because if a guy makes some picks or has a strong arm, you're like, oh, he's a great first baseman, but there's so much more to it that goes to that. He hasn't graded especially well since his Gold Glove year. He also is a nothing on the base paths. So being a defensive, not liability, but being on the bottom end of the defensive spectrum as a first baseman, being slow, having power slumps, I don't know how the market would value a guy like that, both for a year and a half and for a long-term contract. And I think that's why the Blue Jays have never signed him, because how do you agree on a number when a player, and I don't blame Vlad for this, probably sees himself as Fernando Tatis, right? And Tatis signed for over $300 million. And Vlad, he's made lots of money and he's got family background of money. So he's not desperate to get to that next extension. He's desperate to get the most sensible deal. So he can love Toronto all he wants. And I appreciate that. And this isn't a criticism. And him seeing himself very highly isn't a criticism either. But the Blue Jays aren't going to see Vlad at his 100th percentile outcome at 2021. They have to weigh the years after 2021. They have to weigh the fact that first basemen tend to not age well, bigger bodied guys and that type of thing. So there's a lot of questions, and that's why they haven't agreed on a deal. And I don't blame either side for not agreeing to a deal. He's an impossible guy to place a middle ground value on. So yeah, emotions removed from it. I love Vladdy. He's fun to root for. The team would get killed for it. But how many times have we seen the Blue Jays have opportunities to trade players and they're trading them at their lowest value? Fans complain about that all the time. Well, here you have a guy who was even questionable the first month of this season that we're actively in, and we're only halfway through. Like, he was terrible the first month as a baseball player. Yes, he's been hot. Yes, I have expectations that he can be much better than what we've seen, but maybe it's time to finally trade a guy when he's at the height of his value. Chris Bassett would have a ton of value to all these pitching needy teams. Kevin Gausman, he's making $22 a year for the next 2 years. Like, these are guys who are valuable in the market. The Blue Jays could take salary back to increase the return. They could very quickly have a very strong farm system, and they could spend 2025 learning what all these Buffalo boys are about. Let them fail. Let Addison Barger play for 6 weeks straight, even if he sucks, and let him see if he can work through it. Because that intel, to me, for 2025 is more important than a 25% chance at a wild card position.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. It really feels like, would it be nice to come back next year and make the wild card, maybe win a playoff game while we're in this era? It would be fun to finally see that. But when you look at all the odds in the American League becoming deeper and more competitive, even though there are 6 teams, it's not that the American League is the National League where only 2 of them are good. There's a lot of pretty good teams in the American League, and I don't think it's a guarantee the Jays can climb up the standings and be competitive next season. I think it's ironic because when Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins came here in 2015, the big criticism was, they're going to rip apart our beloved Alex Anthopoulos team. They're going to get rid of everybody. And ironically, what happened is they didn't get rid of everyone quick enough, because you look back at their rebuild 2017, 18, and 19, and really the only good trade that I think Atkins made as a seller was one where he took on the salary of Nori Aoki to get Teoscar Hernandez when they traded Francisco Liriano to Houston. So a lot of the other ones they made, like they held on to Josh Donaldson for too long. They only got Julian Merriweather, held on to Aaron Sanchez for way too long. I don't think they held on to Marcus Stroman for too long, but that's another one. If they had moved him a year or two earlier, multiple years of control over Marcus Stroman as opposed to 1.5, they probably net a bigger return. So yeah, it does make a lot of sense, but that kind of moves me to one more question, the last one that I have kind of written down on my notes here. We know the Jays are going to sell this year, and the games don't really matter anymore. They're way back of a playoff spot. What are you watching for in the latter part of the season that's interesting? Like what's a good reason to tune in, and what is there to care about right now?
Well, I'm a baseball junkie, so I'll watch bad baseball anyways. So me personally, I'm watching because it's on. Like, that's enough for me. With that being said, as I mentioned, 2025, learning about what you have for the younger guys. Obviously the hypothetical you're presenting is possibly different, right? Maybe the Blue Jays only trade their pending free agents, and then on the position player side, especially, things don't look that different. You're getting more Kirk, less Jansen, or no Jansen, so means more Kirk, but those things aren't changing too much. But I actually find the, quote unquote Buffalo boys interesting. Like, if they were to tear it down, if they were to find a good Dodgers deal for Bo and a good Mariners deal for Vladdy, and they really stripped it back, then we're watching Spencer Horwitz every day, Davis Schneider every day through the ups and downs. Leo Jimenez is really interesting. He also is out of options next year. Like, he has to be on the major league roster full time, or you lose him as soon as next year. So let him play shortstop every day for 2.5 months. Give Barger third base, time in the outfield. I find that Ernie Clement could play a bunch. Like, he's a little older, but he has a lot of control, and he's kind of interesting too, right? So I don't find that group of Blue Jays unwatchable as much as some teardowns we've seen in the past just be horrific to watch. I'm not saying they'd be good. I'm just saying they'd be entertaining. Like, that, I would be eager to watch Barger get a bunch of at-bats. I'd be eager to watch Leo Jimenez adjust as the league adjusts to him. I'd be eager to see Davis Schneider be able to get himself out of this rut he's in right now. And the Blue Jays are still in that period of time where they're pretending to be competitive. Like, they're not trading yet, so they have to at least pretend, which means he's getting less playing time because he's not hitting well. Fair enough. But once the stakes are removed and he just gets to play through it, I want him to play every day and work through this high fastball thing that's absolutely eating him up. So I find all those things watchable, just like I did when the Jays traded for Teoscar, and I enjoyed Teoscar at bats even when he really struggled early as a Blue Jay. And I don't know if people remember or not, but he was demoted a couple times. Like, he was an up and down majors to AAA guy. So if they stripped it down, the pitching would be horrendous, but wins and losses don't matter. So I would find when they're taking at bats, that'd be very interesting. Maybe they get major league ready pitchers, young guys who are still struggling, but maybe they get that in return for a trade, and then you've got arms to invest your time into, and watching Yariel pitch every fifth day, right? So I would find storylines within the bad baseball, and I think that can be compelling even if wins and losses don't matter.
Right. And that if they blow it up this year, they lead into a full blow up, really tear it down, then the bad baseball is probably not going to last as long. Whereas they only do a little retool and they're still trying to be competitive for next season. The bad baseball might last for a few years.
Thanks for tuning in to Blue Jays Nation Radio. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.